Assassin's Creed Black Flag is a great game for many reasons. Its story is one of the best in the series. It's got such a vast and beautiful Caribbean setting, and the gameplay is pretty special itself. But one of the things that makes Black Flag so special for me is by far its protagonist, and that is Edward Kenway. I reckon if Assassin's Creed Black Flag had an entirely different protagonist that was not Edward Kenway, I highly doubt the game would be as loved as it is today. So, if you haven't figured out by the title, in this video I will talk about why I believe Edward Kenway deserves his own trilogy. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. If you follow the Assassin's Creed series quite closely, you'd know that there's only one protagonist at the moment with his own trilogy, and that is Ezio Auditore. But why did he get 3 games? Well, the answer is actually pretty straightforward, and nothing out of the ordinary. You see, creative director at Ubisoft, Julien Lafayette, simply put it as, we made 3 games with Ezio because people loved Ezio. So it's relatively clear that at the time of Assassin's Creed 2 being released, Ezio was widely loved. Ever since Ezio, there's only really been one main protagonist that's been as engaging as Ezio, and to me that's Edward Kenway. Now I first must say that this is purely my opinion, and not everybody will have the same opinion as me, which is perfectly fine. You may think that Connor is the greatest protagonist or even Eivor, but at the end of the day it's entirely your thoughts. Fast forward a little bit since the Ezio trilogy, and there lies Black Flag. In Black Flag, we get to be a pretty badass pirate that's set in the Caribbean, stepping into the shoes of Edward. He starts off as a pirate, but becomes an assassin when he takes on the identity of Master Assassin Duncan Walpole early in the story. And as the story goes on, Edward's got this sort of charisma that sets him apart from a typical pirate. You see, a typical pirate is often selfish and often cruel, but not Edward. He goes through some major changes throughout the game. Don't get me wrong, at first he's all about greed and survival after being shipwrecked, but then things shift for him. He goes on this journey that transforms him into a father and an actual devoted assassin. With Edward Kenway, he's all about making a positive impact on the world and protecting his loved ones. It's such a great evolution that it should have its own trilogy, set in the massive open seas. We all know that the Assassin's Creed games have a great tendency for implementing historical figures into their games. Take the Ezio games for example. There's Leonardo da Vinci, Caterina Sforza and Niccolo Machiavelli. In Assassin's Creed Black Flag, having a trilogy for Edward Kenway can further delve into the historical figures throughout the Caribbean, because other than what we've seen so far in Black Flag, there's actually quite a lot more real life historical figures that would be perfect for another Edward Kenway pirate game. It's not even newer historical figures that Ubisoft can delve into. Even the characters that we know from Black Flag, such as Blackbeard, Calisto Jack and Bonnie and the others, can be involved and further expanded on. If you're a person that knows your history, I'm sure you know the stories of these famous pirates, and there's definitely a lot more to say. Now, let's go to the ending of Black Flag. So, when the story ends, there's actually quite a large gap that takes place after Black Flag until Edward's death, when he reaches the age of 42. Yes, 42. Edward died pretty young, which is rather tragic, especially if you know how he dies. I'm not gonna get into explaining it here. If you want to know how, I made a video detailing how every protagonist died in the entire series. Anyway, let me get back on track. So, when Black Flag ends, Edward is only 30 years old. So there's a 12-year gap that Ubisoft can showcase throughout more Edward Kenway stories. This so-called trilogy can be similar to Assassin's Creed Mirage, and when I say Assassin's Creed Mirage, I'm just referring to the size of the game. They don't need to be massive games like Black Flag was. Ubisoft could focus primarily on just the story of Edward. Forget about the Helix collectibles, the music notes and the overall useless things to collect as a player. I mean, sure, Ubisoft can add them if they want, but for me, I'd want this trilogy to be all about the story. And speaking of the story, let's focus on the Colonial Brotherhood, or as it's known now as the American Brotherhood of Assassins. An Edward Kenway trilogy can focus on this narrative, following the journey of Edward when he was trained more as an actual assassin and not a pirate. After all, we don't really see much of Edward when he's a true assassin. Then there's also the story of Haytham and how we could see how Edward raised Haytham from early days. I feel like there's such a big gap after Black Flag when it comes to Edward. A conclusion of his character and development is definitely needed, because all we know about him after Black Flag is through the official Assassin's Creed wiki page, and maybe a little bit of the Assassin's Creed books, such as the Forsaken book, but that primarily focuses on Haytham Kenway rather than Edward himself. Edward's conclusion story can be similar to Ezio's. We'd be able to witness the transformation with Ezio from a pirate to an assassin to a family man training his children and then to death. But I don't think I'm ready to see how Edward dies in an actual form of visual media, because the way it's described in the official lore is pretty heartbreaking. It might be one of the saddest moments in Assassin's Creed if it ever does get brought to life. If you remember when Black Flag was released, the game itself at the time actually quite divided the fanbase. Some people loved the fresh mechanics and less focus on stealth, while others felt that it strayed too far from the core Assassin's Creed experience. I wonder how those same fans feel now about the RPG games. I don't even think they're still around. However, there is no denying that Black Flag was a groundbreaking game that introduced so many new elements to the series. The Caribbean setting of Black Flag necessitated new mechanics, such as ship combat and underwater exploration. These new mechanics were an instant success for Ubisoft, and these new features at the time helped make Black Flag a more action-oriented game than previous titles. The other Assassin's Creed games in the series, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, introduced masses of content that to me was way too overwhelming. Even Eivor's character kind of failed to provide a different take of the assassins, the way Edward Kenway does. And then, when Edward himself was introduced after Assassin's Creed 3, it was a refreshing change of pace from the traditional assassin, the Ezios, the Altairs and the Connors. Edward was a loud, brash and selfish pirate, which made him more of a relatable and engaging character for people. Not the fact that he was a pirate, because being a pirate is definitely not relatable. I'm talking about his personality. The completely revamped and refreshed ideas that Black Flag implemented into Assassin's Creed 100% needs to be delved further into a trilogy. In fact, now that I think about it, it does not even need to be a trilogy. Ubisoft just needs to give us a Black Flag sequel, or just one new game with Edward Kenway. The idea of pirates is just far too good to be showcased in just Black Flag. There's way too much real life history that can be showcased that fits perfectly into the timeline of when Edward was still alive. Oh, and speaking of a Black Flag sequel, yes, I know there's Skull and Bones that was supposedly trying to be the Black Flag sequel, but what on earth is even going on with that game? I don't really keep up to date with the development of that game because it's been a complete shit show since it was announced all the way back in 2017. Apparently Skull and Bones was supposed to make use of the pirate setting and naval gameplay mechanics from Black Flag while offering multiplayer gameplay. However, it's no longer connected to the Assassin's Creed series and it's faced so much criticism from testers, and then as a result its release has been pushed back to the time frame of 2022/2023. But we're now past halfway in 2023 and it's nowhere to be seen. This to me is what annoys me the most. Instead of Ubisoft wasting their damn time working on Skull and Bones and completely leaving everybody in the dust, why could they not have just focused on a Black Flag sequel and focused on another Edward Kenway game? We could have had a trilogy by now if Ubisoft did not shit the bed with Skull and Bones. So yeah, that's all I had to say regarding this topic. If you've made it to the end of the video, simply drop a like and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.